This video will dive into a very racist hierarchy system employed by the Spanish in the New World to separate different groups of people from different regions and different cultural backgrounds into a hierarchical social class system. This was known to Spain as the colonial social class system, something the Spanish practiced quite heavily. The first group, there's a lot of different layers to this, but the first grouping or the first division of their social class system in the New World, meaning Mexico, Peru, Chile, other portions, were known as peninsulares. Peninsulares were people who were born in Spain. They're full-blooded Spaniards. They're the only group allowed to hold high office in government in the New World. The second group are called the Creoles. The Creoles are full-blooded Spaniards, but that were born in Latin America. So the difference here is that the Peninsulares are full-blooded Spaniards, but born in Spain. The Creoles are full-blooded Spaniards, but born in Latin America. They are therefore kind of set down as a class below the Peninsulares. They could become officers, though, in the colonial army. These two groups, the Peninsulares and the Creoles, they controlled most of the land, wealth, and power in the Spanish colonies, such as Mexico. A layer down, according to the Spanish, were mestizos. Mestizos were of mixed ancestry between Spaniard and Native American. The Spanish called Native Americans Indians based on the mistake by Christopher Columbus, so that's why you see that word being used. You also have mulattoes. Mulattoes are a mixture of Spanish and African ancestry. Most of the Spanish that came to the New World were men. So a lot of these relationships between mestizo and mulatto, the parents of these offspring are mostly males, and then the opposite side, Native American women or African American women. The next grouping would be African slaves, and at the bottom would be Native Americans. There's a very important pie graph to take a look at here on page 681. As you can see, it shows the different groups. Here's Peninsulares and Creoles. They made up 22.9% of the overall population in 1789. You've got mulattoes and mestizos having a very similar number. Africans were at about 6.4%, mostly slaves for the purposes of labor. And you have Native Americans still making up 55.8%, but they were seen as the lowest group on the Spanish social class system. So once again, the Spanish, this is a very racist system based on where you were from, where you were born, what type of ancestry you had in your blood. Okay, we're going to move on down and we're going to take a look at revolutions that took place to overthrow this type of system. This could be against Spain, it could be against other countries too. We'll first take a look at the revolution in Haiti. This was based on the French colony of Saint Domingue. This is where the first Latin American colony to free itself took place. White slave masters were using brutal methods to terrorize and keep slaves powerless. However, there were about 500,000 African slaves that worked on the sugar plantations of Haiti. Around 1791, 100,000 of those slaves led a revolt in Haiti, and they severely outnumbered their French masters. They were led by a former slave who had become very well educated. His name was Toussaint L'Ouverture. He became their leader despite his lack of military and diplomatic experience. By 1801, he had become a skilled general and a diplomat and began to free all slaves on the island. The French did respond. In 1802, they sent in about 30,000 troops. They captured and eventually imprisoned L'Ouverture. This is L'Ouverture here in a sketch. There he is right there. He's the leader of what's known as the Haitian independence movement. Eventually, because he's captured, as we said, it's going to be led by his lieutenant, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who continued to fight for freedom. Eventually, in 1804, they became the first slave colony to free themselves from European rule, and Haiti became run entirely by former African slaves. Next, we'll take a look at Roman numeral number 3. We're going to talk about how Creoles throughout many other Latin American colonies began to lead independence movements. Let's take a look here at capital letter A, South American independence. Most of the movements in South America were led by two Creole generals, Simón Bolivar, a wealthy Venezuelan Creole, and José de San Martín, an Argentinian. They are depicted in the text here at the top of page 683. You have Simón Bolivar, also known as Libertador, the liberator, and you have, of course, José de San Martín, who is spending most of his time in Argentina. Okay, let's talk about Bolivar first. Bolivar was Venezuelan. He declared independence from Spain in 1811. It was a rough path because he had a very small army of volunteer revolutionaries. A turning point, though, came in 1819 when Bolivar led 2,000 men on a surprise attack against the Spanish in the city of Bogota, Colombia. In 1821, Bolivar had won Venezuelan independence. He then went in March to Ecuador, where he joined with the forces of José de San Martín to continue freeing people from Spanish rule. Now we'll take a look at San Martín, who was from Argentina. They declared independence in 1816, but Spanish forces that were staged in the countries of Chile and Peru were still threatening to them. In 1817, San Martín led an army of forces into Chile, where he joined up with another freedom fighter named Bernardo O'Higgins to finally free Chile. San Martín and Bolivar then joined forces in 1822 to drive the Spanish out of Peru. The Spanish were defeated by the revolutionary forces at the Battle of Ayacucho, which was in Peru in 1824. Therefore, Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador united into a country called Gran Colombia. This was sort of an alliance system to try and stick together in a larger force to defend against Spanish counteractions. Roman numeral 4, we'll take a look at a more specific freedom movement in Mexico, which was known as a cry for freedom by a priest in 1810 named Father Miguel Hidalgo. He led an uprising in the village of Dolores, which is known generally as the Grito de Dolores, or the Cry of Dolores. Eventually, he put together an army of 80,000 men that was defeated by the Spanish in 1811. Jose Maria Morelos put together another rebellion in 1811, but was also defeated by the Spanish under the command of General Augustine de Iturbide in 1815. What's odd in the Mexican independence movement is that a reversal of fortune actually took place in 1821 when the man who stopped the Morelos rebellion actually proclaimed Mexican independence from Spain, that being Augustine de Iturbide. Iturbide actually claimed himself emperor. He wanted control over all of Central America. The countries of Central America declared their own independence from Mexico, and then eventually Iturbide was overthrown in 1823. What happened is the formation of the United Provinces of Central America was created, which included Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Costa Rica. Let's take a look at what happened in Brazil. Brazil has another interesting story. What took place is that Napoleon was practicing the Peninsular Wars, trying to invade Portugal to open up that port. And so the prince at the time, John, escaped to Brazil to avoid Napoleon, and he was trying to rule Portugal from Brazil, which was a Portuguese colony. But then when Napoleon was exiled, John went back to Spain, and he left his son, Dom Pedro, in Brazil. Eventually, the people in Brazil liked Dom Pedro, and so in a bloodless, no military action revolution, Dom Pedro became the next leader of Brazil. The maps here on page number 685 give you a nice look at what Latin America looked like prior to all of these revolutions. You can see that most of Latin America was ruled by Spain and Portugal. However, you have some French colonies, some Spanish colonies on top of the mainland. You have some Portuguese colonies like Brazil. You've got some Dutch colonies and some small British regions and areas there as well. But then after 1830, based on some of these battles of Bolivar and San Martin, you then see that many of these different countries become independent.